Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, war turns to horror in the JJ Abrams-produced Overlord. Set in 1944 on the eve of D-Day, Private Boyce, played by Jovan Adepo, is an American paratrooper sent into France, along with the surviving members of his squad, Wyatt Russell's Corporal Ford, John Magro's Tibbet, Ian DeCastecker's Chase, Jacob Anderson's Dawson, and Dominic Applewhite's Rosenfeld, to destroy a crucial communications tower atop a church. They soon discover and hide with villager Chloe, played by Matilda Olivier, where Boyce and his squad soon discover that beneath the church lies a hidden Nazi lab, led by Palau Aspect's Waffner and Eric Redmond's Dr. Schmidt, that is creating a monstrous army. Ever since he moved from television to film, JJ Abrams has been styling himself as the new Spielberg. He helped revitalise the Mission Impossible, Star Trek and Star Wars franchises and helped spearhead the Cloverfield franchise. And through his production company Bad Robot and his producing credits, he's helped shepherd a lot of new ideas and new talent, in much the same way that Spielberg did with his Amblin Entertainment label. And Abrams has made his devotion to Spielberg very much known. He of course made Super 8, which is an extended tribute to Spielberg and his Amblin work from the 80s. Abrams' latest is Overlord, which as per usual for him was shot in absolute secrecy, and no one knew what it was or even what it was about for the longest time. Many people speculated that it was actually the fourth entry in the Cloverfield franchise, especially since the most recent one, the Cloverfield Paradox, was dumped on Netflix after a troll production. However, the trailer for Overlord dropped, and suddenly people got a very different animal. This was apparently conceived by both Abrams and screenwriter Billy Ray, and the film is directed by Julius Avery, who previously gave us the Australian crime thriller Son of a Gun with Ewan McGregor, which, I have to be honest, I wasn't really the hugest fan of. I actually found that movie to be quite dull, but it did have a very hard edge to it that Avery brings to this movie here. But the question is where this standalone new adventure is something that stands up among the rest of the work that Abrams has produced. Overlord grabs your attention right from the very outset with its opening sequence, which follows Boyce and his squad as they parachute out of their plane in the midst of a huge aerial battle and try and fight to survive. This is a really intense and immersive way to start the movie, and the sound mix is very aggressive to almost its detriment because the dialogue is actively competing with the plane noises in the background, which is somewhat unfortunate because we are introduced to several of the characters during this stretch, but I was at some points struggling to make out what they were saying. Some lines are virtually unintelligible. Nevertheless, on a visual level, this is very impressive. You can tell that the filmmakers were trying to do something very much similar to, say, the Omaha beach landing sequence in Saving Private Ryan, but in a very heightened and stylized fashion. And to do this, much of this sequence is staged in a continuous shot. It's several takes digitally stitched together, but we follow Boyce throughout the entire sequence. We follow him as the plane is being shot through, people are being severed in half, the plane catches fire and explodes, people are falling into the flames, people are jumping out the front of it, and then Boyce is thrown out of the plane and we follow him down all the way through as he's struggling and he's fighting to get his parachute open, and you can feel your heart rate just rising as you're watching this happen on screen. Planes are exploding all around them and it does not stop for a good 5 minutes or so, and it really is a great way to start the movie. It's a very all-action sequence. This sets the tone for much of Overlord to follow, which, yes, it is a war movie, conventionally speaking, for at least its first half, but it's a very exaggerated and hyperbolic one, and this serves the movie well because it knows it's going to have to do a genre shift halfway through the narrative, and when it does do that transition, it still feels tonally consistent with itself. At the same time, however, this is a war movie that is very self-aware of itself. It knows the tropes of the genre. Fairly early on, one of the soldiers starts talking about the plans that he's going to be making after he comes back from the war, and you know that as soon as someone says that, they're going to die, but it's rarely as instantaneous as it is in Overlord, and it establishes the movie as having a bit of a dark humour about itself. And when you think about it, having war and horror together makes sense, really, because war is exactly that, and it has the capacity to turn men into monsters, literally, as is the case here. However, whilst Overlord both starts and ends very big, unfortunately in the middle, that's where it loses a lot of its early energy, unfortunately. Once they find Chloe and they go back to her village and stay in her home, that's where a lot of the second act of the movie takes place, and it distinctly slows down, trying to build a sense of suspense and mystery about what's going on, and it tries to build tension, be it either the Nazis doing home searches and they're trying to avoid giving away their position, or them simply trying to figure out how they're going to accomplish their mission if they have such a limited number of men. Nevertheless, it feels artificially constricted in a way that doesn't really serve the story, I don't think. I can understand parts of the story being set here, but so much of the middle portion of this movie either takes place in either the ground floor dining room or the upstairs attic, and it really feels like the movie is trying to conserve itself for the big finish. It feels like a common trick that a lot of mid-budget or lower-budget films try to do, where they start out very big and they end even bigger, but in the middle they're just trying to bide their time until they can get to the good stuff, and it did feel a little bit like that here, unfortunately. I never lost interest in the movie. I was never bored. I was always invested in what was going on screen, but I could definitely tell that the movie had dropped some of its momentum from the early stages, and that felt really disappointing, especially because knowing where the film was going to go, knowing that it was going to transition into horror, it then at that point became a question of, okay, when is that going to happen? I want that to happen so that this movie can come back to the life that I know it showed in its early stages. Once Boyce accidentally stumbles into the lab, it's at that point that the horror element starts to become a lot more overt as we get a long sort of tour through the laboratory, and it becomes this haunted house, essentially, with lots of individual scares and freaky imagery, and at that point, that's when the movie starts to come back to life again, and I wish that that was a little bit sooner in the movie than it really was. It does feel like it's almost 45, maybe close to an hour before that really happens. I think the reason why the middle of the movie starts to drag somewhat is that's normally where you would put the character development, which is lacking in this movie. A lot of the characters are very much one-dimensional. In terms of the lead role, Jovan Adepo, best known for his work on Fences, I think acquits himself well in it, and he plays Boyce with a sensitivity and compassion that's often made fun of by his fellow soldiers, but nevertheless has a strength and resiliency within him. But because of his almost innocence, going wide-eyed into war, he's horrified by what he witnesses, and he's very much an audience POV character. The film never lets you forget that. However, it is at the cost of him being an interesting character in his own right. He drives the movie forward, but he's not really a wholly engaging character. The supporting cast, though, get even less to work with. Many of the other soldiers in this movie are simply defined by their one character trait or attribute. For example, Ian de Castecker of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. plays Chase. He always carries his camera. That pretty much defines the character from top to bottom, and you could do the same for all the other soldiers. As the lone female main cast member, Mathilde Olivier, I think, does well in the action girl role that the film tries to give her. She certainly knows how to wield a mean flamethrower, but she spends a lot of this film either being chased or being forced upon by German officers. Not once, but twice. Wasn't really a huge fan of that movie. I will say, however, that there is a major breakout in the film. Wyatt Russell, in my opinion, runs away with this film. He's the son of Kurt Russell, and boy, is he a chip off the old block. He looks and sounds exactly like his old man, and he has so much of his charisma. And playing Ford, you really get the sense that he could carry a movie all by himself. His character is the one that's probably the most sort of morally ambiguous. He's very much the dedicated soldier that will do anything to get the mission done, no matter what. And he's certainly the most interesting character in my opinion. I think a lot of that comes down to Russell's performance. And as the film goes on, and as he's let loose more and more because the film's getting more and more crazy, that's when you really start to see Russell shine. And I genuinely think that this guy could become a star. In fact, give this guy a really good action script. I reckon that he's the next big action star. Do it, Hollywood. Do it. Once we reach the third act, though, that's when all hell really starts breaking loose, and the movie finally reclaims the energy that it established in its opening as Abrams and Avery unleash a torrent of craziness on the screen that becomes quite relentlessly, viscerally entertaining. And if you're a gore fan, there's plenty to like here, as heads are crushed or exploded, people get their faces blown off, or people get impaled on hooks. The violence here is quite nasty and squelchy, but at the same time it's also quite cathartic and fun and enjoyable in its own way, and it really is a blast to watch this all go down. I just found myself wishing there was a bit more of it, because by the time this all gets started, it does feel like the movie is on its way to its home stretch. It's building up towards the finale, and so I wished that it was just a little bit longer, made up a bit more of the movie. It feels like the film that we were promised is kind of the last third of it, but not all of it. And strange as it is to say, it does feel undeveloped on a story level. If you were to ask me what the Nazis' plan was in this movie, or why the Doctor invented the serum, or what the serum does specifically, I'm not sure I could really tell you. The film never really goes into exact details about it. In fact, while the characters often talk about the Doctor, he's barely even in the movie. A lot of the villainy is given to Game of Thrones' Palau aspect, and he really seems to be enjoying himself doing that. Nevertheless, that, combined with the fact that the movie takes place in a lot of confined locations, made me sense that there was a certain amount of trepidation about the movie, especially given how gory and hard R it is and how different it would be to a lot of other Abrams projects. I get the sense that, yes, if it was successful, they could expand upon it, but if it failed, they could easily forget about it. I think this is made clear by the fact that, unusually for one of Abrams' productions, there isn't a lot of world building here. There isn't a sense of a wider universe outside this movie. It feels very self-contained, and some viewers might find that fairly refreshing as just a standalone adventure, but it's a bit unusual, and it just gives me the sense that they didn't quite have the confidence in the project they really should do, and that's why the film takes so long to really find its footing. But I'm glad that it eventually does, because I did have a good time with this movie. I liked Overlord, I just wish there was a little bit more of it. But I think for most people, it will do exactly what it says on the tin. If you want a genre-bending World War II monster mash, that's exactly what you're going to get. And while I've sat here and said that the story and characters are quite thin, and they are, that won't matter to most people. The movie is very entertaining at what it does, once it finally gets there. And the film does deserve to be seen with a crowd, I think. It's made for that environment, with an audience that will laugh, cheer, and groan in disgust. Whether it will stand up away from that environment, I don't really know, to be honest, but if they do end up making an Overlord 2, make it double servings, please. Overlord is an enjoyable genre mashup, but it doesn't feel like it goes far enough with the concept. Starting strong with an immersive but very stylised parachute sequence, the film soon loses momentum in the middle with a drawn-out second act that takes too long to get to where the story needs to go, and far too much of the movie is confined to a single housebound location. By the time it finally gets to the monster mash that you've come to see, the film is already nearing a close, although it does provide enough gory thrills that you wish they reached this point sooner than they had. It feels undercooked and unusual unusually self-contained for an Abrams-backed movie, with the exact motivations of the Nazis and their evil doctor not fully explained, as if there was some hesitance about the film and left open should a sequel expand upon it. The characters are fairly one-dimensional, but Wyatt Russell steals the show, channeling his dad's charisma that shows serious action star potential, but this is ultimately fun but slightly unsatisfying. If you like this review, then you can enlist in my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.